Kindred UMC live show features adults discussing adult topics, occasionally with adult language. It may not be suitable for young viewers. Please use discretion before watching.
Hello all, welcome once again to the Kindred UMC pre-recorded live show, coming to you not actually live, unfortunately, but pre-recorded from my front room, aka Kindred Studio A. My name is Chris Hayden. I am the pastor of Kindred UMC.
Hi, I'm Courtney Young. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Kindred UMC.
And I'm some guy named Preston, and gas prices are going down.
Are they?
10 cents.
Oh, hey, fantastic. That's some fantastic news, Preston. I'm glad you came. We are continuing our Lenten season as we go from Ash Wednesday all the way up to Easter. We're getting ready to crucify Christ. And also the resurrection, which is also important, and we shouldn't diminish that at all. But we're going to be looking at, we have been and are continuing to look at the final week from Palm Sunday all the way up to the resurrection. And we've been looking specifically at the Gospel of Mark. I call it the March Through Mark. Isn't that clever? I'm going to need more from you guys, all right?
That's where Mark's from.
From March?
From March, and March is from Mars, which means war, and Mark means a man of war, which is also an animal.
I appreciate the effort on that.
You're welcome.
You did make some tangential connections that are fun, and that's what we're about.
Full of grace and life.
So I know for us, these release every week, but we're kind of like, we record them 2 at a time often and that kind of thing. So I will remind you that the last time we talked, we had the Palm Sunday where Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey, and then we had Jesus chasing people out of the temple. He was mad that they were selling sacrificial animals and like keeping people out of the temple. And the big quotation was, house of prayer for all nations.
He had a temple tantrum.
Yeah, he had a temple tantrum. Maybe I'll go back and relabel the YouTube video Temple Tantrum.
Oh my gosh.
So this, we're going to look at the text immediately after that. So this is Mark chapter, I actually don't like the way they divided it up. So we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 11, verses 27 through chapter 12, verse 12. So it actually kind of spans, I think these two stories actually belong together, which is a fun little note. When scripture was originally written, they didn't put the numbers in. Like, the numbers were added later. And so if you don't agree with the numbers, you're well within your rights to be like, you know what, I think this is a chapter, not that's a chapter. Like, you're allowed to do that.
Is that from like oration and someone vigorously writing down like, hey, we're doing the bonfire now.
No, that's not how it worked.
All right. Well.
No, honestly, it's just like a numeric system. It was their first best attempt. It kind of comes from the King James Bible, which was the first like putting it in English. Actually, I may not be right on that. Look, Google it.
Give it a Google.
I may not be right on that. Because I can't remember an actual like academic source on that. That's just kind of something I heard. So anyway, let's start at chapter 11, verse 27. So here, it's kind of like two stories. And again, this is something that Mark does a lot. He like bookends stories and he puts stories within stories. It's kind of his like thing. That's what he likes to do. And so we're first going to look at Jesus goes back to the temple. And the Sadducees and Pharisees, the lawmaker people, the churchy people, really, start to kind of like question him and be like, hey man, like, what gives you the right to say these things and do these things? What gives you the right? And then Jesus kind of throws that back in their face and says, well, let me ask you a question. And they get into a little bit of a debate. And then in response to that, Jesus tells this story about a vineyard and an owner sending people to collect rent, and the people in the vineyard like not reacting violently to everyone everyone who's collecting rent, they like beat or kill, and that story actually goes back to something in Isaiah that's a bit of a poem and a story that the people who would have heard this originally would already know. So when you hear vineyard, I want you to think of Israel. Like that's what people would have understood. This is a metaphor for the nation of Israel, the God's country kind of thing. And then the Father is obviously the Father. So here we go. There's two stories, and we're going to talk about how they relate. Okay. So, verse 27, again, they came to Jerusalem. So this is the Jesus, he kind of leaves town and then comes back. And he's going back to the temple again. So they came to Jerusalem. As he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and scribes and the elders came to him and said, "Hey, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority to do them?" So again, challenging the authority. Jesus said to them, "I'll ask you one question and answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things." So like, hey, you answer my question, I'll answer yours. Okay. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it human origin? So this is John the Baptist, the guy who was out in the wilderness. He was baptizing people, wiping their sins clean, preaching repentance, and the Pharisees and Sadducees hated that because it was all outside of their authority. And he's like, "Hey, you want to ask me my authority? Let me ask you this. What about John's authority?" Okay. Well, of human origin, answer me. They argued with one another. If we say from heaven, he'll say, why then did you not believe him? But shall we say of human origin? They were afraid of the crowd, for all regarded John as truly a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." So they're too afraid to say John's bad because the people will turn against them.
Lose their shareholders.
Yeah. But they also don't want to say John's good because they opposed him and were against him. And he was challenging their authority. They don't want to give up authority, but they also don't want to risk upsetting the crowd because that's where their authority comes from, So then he began to speak to them in parables. This is that vineyard thing. A man planted a vineyard. He put a fence around it, dug a pit for the winepress, built a watchtower, and then he leased it to tenants and went on to another country. So he rents his vineyard out. When the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants to collect from them his share of the produce of the vineyard. But they seized him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. So they're refusing to pay their rent. And again, he sent another slave to them. This one they beat over the head and insulted. Then he sent another, and that one they killed. And so it was with many others. Some they beat, others they killed. And he had still one other, a beloved son. Finally, he sent him. He sent him to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But those tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will become ours." So they seized him, killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard. So he's sending a bunch of people to collect this money. And this is all parable. This is not literal. This is a parable. Sending a bunch of people to collect the money. They keep on murdering and beating these people. And finally he says, "Let me send my most beloved son." And they're like, "Let's kill him." And that's the analogy he's making for how the scribes are reacting to God and Israel. So what then will the owner of the vineyard do? Will he come to destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others? Have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. When they realized that he told this parable against them, they wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowd, so they left him and went away. So, again, this is a Mark thing. Starts with a question about authority. Jesus kind of hands them their ass or their behinds a little bit, and then tells a story, and then it kind of wraps up and then they kind of slink away because they couldn't make their argument about authority. And beginning, middle, end. This is kind of how Mark does it. What?
Like preparing for the beating, like, so.
Well,
You had a good day at school, huh?
Well,
Were you there?
There's a lot going on in this. So first of all, the story about the vineyard comes from Isaiah. And so the vineyard is, like, this is stuff people would have known. The vineyard is a metaphor for Israel. And the owner of the vineyard is an obvious metaphor for God. And so what do you make of that? Like, what's going on with, and especially when it comes to, like, this relationship to, like, who has the power to do what? Because that's kind of what this is all about, you know? So, like, first of all, what just basically happens in the story? Like, what's the parable that he tells?
The renters don't care. They don't. It doesn't matter who comes, by what authority, besides, I guess, the owner coming later if you want to really finish the story. But even his, like, best representative of himself, his son, comes. Yeah. And they
still were, like, angry and let's kill him, like, that kind of vibe.
They Cain and Abel, and what else? Jacob and Esau them.
Yeah.
There's always what can we get out of this?
So who do you think in that story, like, who represents whom?
So there's always the slighted, or those who think they are slighted, which are the renters, thinking we shouldn't have to pay. We are slighted here. Someone owns us, technically.
Pharisees, maybe?
Yeah.
So the Pharisees look
at us. Yeah, the people who are literally challenging Jesus' authority.
Yeah. What gives you the right to think like we think?
And this weird belief that, and we're allowed to enforce that through force. Mm. We can use violence to enforce our, like, preference on how this ought to go, you know? And there's an analogy there with kind of what's going on with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Mm. And, you know, he literally calls him the son. Like, it seems to me that it's a pretty clear metaphor for Jesus. Mm-hmm. You know, when the parable of the landowner sends his beloved son and they kill him. And you got to remember, Jesus has explicitly labeled, I'm going to Jerusalem, they're going to arrest me, they're going to crucify me, and then I'm going to come back from the dead. Like, he has said it out loud directly to his disciples. So there's no question about, like, what Jesus believes is about to happen. And so, like, he's using this metaphor of death. Like, these people are going to kill me. And he's kind of implying a lot of stuff here. And so, like, I think understanding this all comes down to, it's the question of authority. So Jesus is, like, he's chasing people out of the temple. He's performing miracles of, like, he's giving sight to the blind. He's, he's curing mental illness, essentially. He's curing epilepsy, like, which would have been seen as demonic possession, you know. He's doing all these things. One of the key things to understand that is that when Jesus does those miracles, he's not just restoring people's bodies. It was the common belief that if you were born blind, it's because you sinned or your parents sinned.
Right.
You're an inherently evil person, and this is an expression of God's judgment. And so when Jesus comes in and forgives these things and, like, cleans them and, like heals them, it's not just about the physical, it's about the spiritual. He's not just saying now you can see, he's saying now you're free and forgiven. And this is a direct threat because the way that the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the chief priests and all the lawyers derive their power and their status is by judging and condemning people. Hmm. And when Jesus says, no one is condemned, no one is judged, I have the power to forgive sin and you are forgiven and healed, all of a sudden, he's not just, like, coming in and making things better. He's directly challenging the authority of the Sadducees. And that's why their question of authority is so important. They're basically saying, like, hey man, you're, like, ruining our whole system here. Like, we're rich and powerful and you're, like, kind of screwing it all up by, like, preaching this gospel of, like, everyone's allowed in. That's where our whole thing comes from, is not everyone's allowed in. We decide, like, that's kind of their whole thing. And like that's why these are the beginnings of like, and that's why they decided to maybe try and kill him. Like it goes that far. They're so addicted to that power that they want to try and kill him. So I want to talk about we spend a lot of time, and I think appropriately so, but we spend a lot of time kind of like positioning ourselves on the outside of the church, even though we are definitely in the church, and kind of like critiquing and making, I think, important critical observations, and also maybe talking a little bit of crap about the church, you know? I'd like for us to consider, for the most part, we are the insiders. Mm-hmm. Like, we grew up in church. This is a message about us. This is a message about where Jesus is concerned most. And it's not the people on the inside who kind of like have authority and have a YouTube channel and an ordination and leadership, and like you guys are both on the board, you're elected, you're like, you guys are in on the end, you know? And so I wonder what do you make of these stories as they apply to a modern day church and like us on the inside? Like, and just a couple of words that might help. Like, I think this says something about judgment. I think this says something about exclusion. I think this says something about who is and is not a part of the kingdom. Hint, it's everyone. You know, like. So, what do you make of this as leaders in the church? You know, what do you make of like this temptation to judge and exclude?
I was talking to a friend today, actually. It's interesting. Like I'm just making a lot of ties between that conversation and this one. And this particular friend, love this person, care about this person. They, similarly to me, have like been to a lot of churches, but just always kind of, even though they've been on the in, always kind of felt like an outsider, always kind of felt like a loner.
Here's a fun newsflash. I think everyone does.
But one of the things
Isn't that interesting?
But nobody brings it up.
Right. And one of the things that this person brought up to me when we were talking through this idea is they were like, yeah, I just feel like no matter where I go, like I'm always like thinking about how to not be the loner and how to not be excluded and what I need to do, like to not. And this person's a very like, you wouldn't think that they saw themselves that way, but they do see themselves that way. And we were just talking about, you know, our own individual experiences of that. And I think so much of that comes from like, my experience in the church has been constantly with all the different churches that I have been to, thinking about like who I should be, you know, like how, and I said to this person, I said, I think part of the problem is instead of saying like, oh, I'm going to like focus on what God says about me so that I won't be the loner. I said, I think it's the opposite. I think you need to focus on the grievance behind feeling like you're the loner, because if this is happening in every single church that you're going to, then there's probably something to be said for the fact that like, oh, nobody wants to see me and love me for who I am.
And this is a hard one, because in most circumstances, I would... in similar circumstances, I would say, well, there's a common denominator. Maybe it's you. Except my profound experience with the church, I think this is one of the exceptions.
Right, and I agree with that. And so the point I was kind of getting at is like, I think in my own experience at different church leaderships, we're told, think about how you, like, what should you be? Like, who does God say you are, and how should you be that? And I think we get so caught up on those rules, those like...
So I remember, this was a very small incident, but I think it for me, it was kind of the beginning of me waking up to some of this. So I was a worship director. I was talking with, and we had the church I was serving had a traditional service and a contemporary service, and I had been doing some research and like reading and about online about, and I was on this kick of like, I think we might want to consider like defeminizing the chancel, because like we have far more women than we have men involved in worship, you know? And so maybe some of that is that we've kind of feminized worship, and maybe we should just, and I wasn't like dead set on it. I was just like, let's just give this a try. Let's just see what's up. And one of the traditional people was really upset with me about like not having flowers and not having like plant life, you know. And I explained kind of my reasoning, and I was like, let's just give this a try and see what happens. And she was pretty insistent. And so I compromised and I said, all right, how about this? How about in the traditional service, we'll have flowers and we'll do that. And then for the contemporary service, which she did not attend, we'll just move those aside and have it not be like the central focus. And I thought that was a good compromise. It's not what I wanted. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not what I was advocating for, but I thought it was like, this is a reasonable compromise. I ended up eating a lot of caca for that decision. Like from not just her, but like church leaders and like my pastor gave me a bunch of crap about it. And I remember being like, I don't understand how I'm the villain in this story. Like it seems to me like I was a reasonable, adult, empowered, elected, hired leader in the church, mm-hmm. trying to make a good decision, using my best discernment, and even being willing to like humbly admit, like, I don't have all the answers. Let's try and meet somewhere in the middle. And somehow that wasn't good enough. Yeah. And it's like, and I remember feeling this overwhelming feeling of like, I don't think it's me. I don't think it's me. I think it's you. I think this is a problem. Like you can't accept something that is even remotely deviant. And these are clearly not essentials. What color the carpet is, kind of stuff. Yes. Like, and you can't accept even just a slight compromise on any of that. And you're acting like it is the end-all, be-all of mm-hmm. worship.
Right.
It's like, I don't understand this. What are we doing?
I'm having something being tickled. Has been a humongous debate since the beginning of time between past, future, traditions, ideals, and the other side, which is truth and honesty. What laws are being created at this time might not present themselves equally in the present with the truth that we're all seeing right now. So flowers on an altar in a sanctimonious church chapel that has Jesus on the cross, and he's made out of clay, and he's just been there for years and years, and God forbid he falls and breaks because he's made out of clay and is hanging from wire.
I'm surprised that, because I used to consult with, I'm surprised at how many churches can't let go of, like they can't, I'm not even saying get rid of the cross. I'm saying like, hey, can we build a new cross to hang somewhere different that looks different so that we can actually accomplish some of the like audio visual stuff that we have to accomplish in order to get everybody to like sing along and participate. Like, how about we just make a new cross? Right. They're made out of wood. We can go to Home Depot right now and buy wood, you know? And like, how many people are like, not that, you don't take down that cross. Like, mm-hmm. that's not the one that they crucified him on. You know that, right?
I want to get into the nitty gritty and nail your hands into them and you bleed on it.
Like
what's the problem here?
Right.
Yeah, it's absurd
it's
to me.
It's an attachment. It's literally what you were talking about. An attachment to an ideal of something that you're supposed to be, that everybody is supposed to be seeing on you. And I'm going to quote some Martin Luther and technically some Casting Crowns. If you're putting a mask on in front of others to show others your mask, who are you showing?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of us, and I can identify with this because a lot of my big transition came from finally shedding this. There's a lot of us who are, I think, addicted to the mask, the image, and anything that comes in and starts to challenge and even starts to imply that, hey, maybe taking off the mask and being seen for who you are and risking what you really think and what you really believe, and also doing it humbly, allowing other people to think what they think and maybe disagree with you. That is a genuinely terrifying thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's why we worship a God who was crucified. Yeah, you should be genuinely terrified. You should be. This is hard work, and it's dependent on something bigger than us. And if you're not following Jesus to the cross, then what are we doing here?
Right.
Yeah, but even Peter didn't. So
well, and
Where are
also like, and that's kind of always the follow up for me is like, and also be kind to yourself. If you're actually willing to engage that and willing to be honest with it, then also be kind to yourself, because even Peter denied. But if you're just avoiding the process entirely, then it, like, hey man, it's time to take up your cross. You know, it's time to take up your cross and follow Jesus, trusting that that death leads to resurrection.
Can you explain what take up your cross means?
Well, I mean, I can, but we're
I mean,
about
not
out of
like-
time. I'll do it ever so briefly because we're about out of time. So take up the cross in Roman society is a sign of public shame and excruciating pain and death. Like, horrible. It's about the worst way you could imagine to die, you know? And it's publicly demonstrated, and it's a demonstration of, you have no power, we have all the power, keep your mouth shut, and if you don't line up with us, then this is your fate. Like, that's what it's, and so it's remarkable that our God said, all right, do that to me. He didn't say like, oh God, I hope this doesn't happen.
Or no,
Right.
goodbye.
Yeah. What he said was, that's how I want it. Give it to me, so that you know for fact that whatever befalls you, I'm with you. And the invitation to take up your cross is a promise that whatever befalls you and whatever consequences come from speaking the truth, and humbly speaking the truth, risking being wrong, you know, because when we speak the truth, we have to confess that, hey, I don't have the truth completely figured out.
Yeah.
So this is the truth as best I understand it.
Including having your feelings hurt about things that were done as a child that may not be done anymore at a church.
Yes.
Flowers on the altar.
Yes.
Men in the clergy.
Yes.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, listening to women preach.
Right.
Or like
LGBTQ.
marrying gay people, you know, like all this stuff. Like, fair enough. You disagree? Fair enough. Absolutely. We can talk about that. But you're not allowed to tell me that I can't follow my conscience when I have actually engaged my God and my best understanding of theology on it, and you think you can tell me that I don't have it. Like,
doesn't that tie into this?
it's one thing to disagree with me, it's another thing to say you can't do that, and it is objectively pharisaical. It is objectively what Jesus is talking about. Like, by what
Circle it around.
By what authority do you tell me that I can't love my parishioners this way? By what authority? Like, and that's what this is about.
From a scared authority.
You're trying to control something that is utterly out of your control, and it should not be in your control. So, all right, we've gone on too long. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.